I'd like to call to order the St. Helena Planning Commission meeting for May 5th, 2015, and ask Commissioner Heil to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Present.
Heil,
Present.
Kistner,
Here.
Commissioner Monette,
Here.
Chairperson Parker.
Present. Moving on, I'd like to move to public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on tonight's agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the commission may not engage in discussion nor take actions on matters not described on the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Would anyone like to speak at public forum? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to the consent items.
Are we going to approve the minutes?
I'm moving on to there under the consent items. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Moving on to the consent items, we have 2 items on the consent items. One is the approval of the minutes from our meeting on April 21st, 2015. The next is a design review exemption. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes?
There's only one place where my name's misspelled. I don't know that it matters, but it's on the second page, and just one of the M's is missing. Otherwise, no.
Thank you.
All right. And does anyone have any comments or questions on the design review exemption consent item?
Oh, on the first page. Yes, I have a question, but I'm not sure. I have a question.
Can you turn your mic on?
Yeah, it is on. I have a question that was precipitated by this item. I'm not in disapproval of the applicant at all, but I did want to ask a question. I don't know if I need to pull it to ask a
Yes,
question.
you do need to pull it to ask a
Okay.
question.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to pull that, and then we're going to have a brief staff report, and then you can ask your question.
Sure. This consent item is a design review exemption. It's a request by Melissa Griggs for a design review exemption to remodel and expand an existing 2,707 square foot, 2-story single-family residence at 1945 Spring Mountain Road in the medium-density residential district. And I can answer any questions you may have at this
And
time.
Commissioner Monette, what's your question?
I was just wondering. I just noticed that the exclusions for 196 square feet for the second unit and 200 for the garage were considered, and I just wanted to know. I know we had removed those from consideration. I wanted to know the timeline. If you have any idea when those are going to be taken to the city council and implemented. City council approved.
Victor may be able to speak to this, but there were issues involved with the second unit exemptions and stuff moving forward with getting the housing element adopted, and so as well as things in the general plan. So we wanted to get those things completed before we did that, so it didn't create any complications in getting those adopted.
So as soon as that's then it will go to the city council. Is that the okay? Thank you.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Public comment? All right. Going to close the public comment and have a roll call vote, or a motion, please.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Commissioner Heil,
Yes.
Kistner,
Yes.
Sweeney,
Yes.
Monette,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Moving on to our public hearings, our only item for tonight is our housing element update, and if we could get a brief staff report, that would be...
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. The item before you tonight, obviously, is the housing element. This is probably the best way to describe it, is a long time coming. As noted in the staff report, the history of this update process dates back to a little over a year. The Commission most recently held a workshop on the housing element on April 7th. And the next step for the housing element will be going to council, which is tentatively set for May 26th. And any action tonight by the Commission is a recommendation to council. I'd like to note that on Friday, we did receive a letter from HCD essentially approving the housing element as it's before you. It's probably the best way to describe it is blessing the housing element. HCD will not formally give us their certification until after the city formally adopts it. But essentially, HCD in effect said if the city adopts this element based on the way it's written or substantially written, we support the way it is written. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. I would have gotten you a copy of that letter, but I've been slaving through jury duty somewhat unexpectedly the last couple of days. So I appreciate your forbearance on that. From a CEQA standpoint, there's a negative declaration which is included in the packet. The comment period is still open. To date, we only have one comment letter, and that's the one up in the dais from Caltrans. The commission doesn't have it. We do have a letter from Caltrans. Let me describe it. Essentially, it acknowledges the receipt of the negative declaration and then goes on to state that the Caltrans, let me just read, I guess, the most relevant parts. The city has developed an urban limit line to control and limit development in order to ensure the prized agricultural and open spaces remain for future generations. That housing element does not propose any rezoning that would allow new residential units or other development beyond what is allowed under the current regulations. So, in effect, they like it, that aspect of the way things are put together. And then they go on to talk about vehicle trip reductions, which frankly I think this section or the set of comments is really more germane to the city's general plan update. But let me just read it briefly. We encourage you to develop transportation demand management policies to encourage usage of nearby public transit lines and reduce vehicle trips on the state highway system. These policies could include lower parking ratios, car sharing programs, bicycle programs, and showers for employees of local businesses, and providing transit passes to residents and employees, among others. And then it goes on to reference more information, where the city can get more information on those points. So based on the comments from Caltrans, I don't see any effect on the negative deck. They're not questioning the presumptions or assumptions in there. As you're aware, Christine O'Rourke is the consultant that's been working on this and doing the lion's share of the work, and staff definitely appreciates that. And the as noted in the staff report, the changes that are proposed from the last version of the housing element that the commission saw are noted in blue. So you essentially have this multicolored document. The original changes in red reference the changes from the original 2009 housing element. The modifications in blue essentially are the latest updates. Most of those reflect the dialogue staff has had with HCD since the council and commission reviewed this. It's kind of been an ongoing process in the last 2 to 3 weeks with HCD. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Christine, who's just going to highlight some of the key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor.
Great, thank you, Victor. This is on, right? Okay. So, yeah, Victor just did a great job of kind of summing up the process and where we are and where we've been. So I'll just go over some of the changes that we've made. As you'll recall, you had a meeting on April 7th and gave us some changes. So those changes were made to the document. We had already submitted the housing element to HCD. But during the process, when we were kind of going back with their revisions, we identified the changes that the Planning Commission wanted to make. So we've incorporated those changes. They're shown in your document in blue. And then during those couple of weeks with HCD, we, again, went kind of back and forth. And so the changes that were made to the document are the ones that they've approved, kind of HCD required changes. And we did receive that letter that basically is finds that the draft housing element is in compliance with state housing element law as drafted. So if the housing element is adopted in this format or essentially the same, then we'll be able to get our final certification letter, which will happen after the housing element's adopted, and it'll be sent back to HCD. They have another 90 days to issue that final certification letter. So the changes that HCD made, there were a little, not quite 40 changes. Most of them were very minor in nature, and I'm not going to go through them all. A lot of them, especially to the housing needs assessment document, were just to kind of clarify some of the language, to clarify the city's regulations and existing policies. They did ask for some additional information to be added on services that are available to the disabled. They also wanted us to add some estimates of the farm worker population in St. Helena, because previously we had just relied on a study that had been done that analyzed the farm worker populations in all of Napa County. So we added that to the housing needs assessment document. In the housing goals, policies, and 8-year action plan, a lot of those were also minor changes. There was a lot of what HCD called strengthening the program language. So whereas it used to say consider a regulation or consider an ordinance, it now says review the existing regulations and adopt as appropriate. So we did make many changes that are kind of along those lines. So what I really wanted to do is just focus on 2 of the more substantive changes. And one is regarding the zoning definition of a family. And that, most of the kind of the background information on that is in the housing needs assessment. And that is on page, I'll pull that right up here. That's on page 148. So essentially the definition that's in the St. Helena in the zoning code is too restrictive, and the California courts have found similar, have invalidated similar definitions. Because the definition, first of all, it refers to 2 or more people living together that are either related by blood, marriage, or legal adoption. And it also sets a numerical limit on the number of unrelated people that may live in a housing unit, and it caps it at 5. So both of those are actually not legal. And so what we've done is they violate privacy laws and also fair housing laws. So what we've done is added a new program to the housing element to the goals, policies, and 8-year action plan, and that's a new program. Program HE1K, and that just simply says that the city will update the definition of family, and we're not trying to write that definition now in the housing element, but the program says the family may be defined as 1 or more persons living together as a single housekeeping unit in a dwelling unit. The important thing is that there's no reference to whether those individuals are related by blood or marriage or adoption, and that there's no numerical limit on the number of people in the household. So that's one of the more substantive changes. The other change is in the goals, policies, and 8-year action plan. And that is related to program HE1D, which is you'll find on page 9 of that document. So what's happened is the City Council is interested in kind of revisiting the zoning designations for the medium density residential district. And that's because that district has a very broad density range. It goes from 5.1 all the way up to 16 units, which is, and there's a lot of single family homes currently in that zoning district. So what we did with HCD, we kind of went back and forth, and they agreed that what the city would do is to review and adopt design review guidelines, and then at that time would remove the conditional use permit for multifamily housing in the high density residential district, and also for the sites that are identified in table 42 in that key housing opportunity table that are currently zoned medium density. And there are 7 such sites on that table. And then concurrently, while the city is evaluating the rest of the sites that are currently in the medium density residential district, and considering moving some of those sites into or redesignating or rezoning some of those sites to a more appropriate zoning district that better reflects the existing type of development and density that's in those neighborhoods. After that happens, then the city will go back and consider removing the conditional use permit for any parcels that are still in a medium density residential district. So that is that was found acceptable by HCD. So we've talked about already the environmental review document. The city did prepare an initial study that essentially found that there are no significant impacts to the environment through the adoption of the housing element, and the staff also prepared a draft negative declaration. The reason for that is really because this is a policy level document. Also, we're not proposing any significant changes. We're not doing any rezoning or proposing intensification of any of the sites. So there really aren't any changes from the significant changes from the past housing element. So all of the housing that's envisioned in this housing element is already reflected in the general plan and in the zoning ordinance. I just saw that letter from Caltrans. I think the other thing that we can do is note there are three programs right now in the housing element that talk about reducing parking. There's one for reducing parking in the high density zone, another for reducing parking for second units, another for exploring shared parking in the mixed use zone. So I think we have a lot of the programs that Caltrans would be looking for already in the housing element. So I agree. I don't think that's an issue. So tonight we're just asking for the Planning Commission to consider the negative declaration and the draft negative declaration, the initial study, and then to adopt the resolution that would recommend adoption of the housing element to the City Council. Again, the City Council is scheduled to hold a public hearing on the draft housing element and consider adoption on May 27th. So I know there's going to be a question, so I might as well just address it now about the changes that were made. And by the way, I just focused on those couple ones. Of course, if you have any questions on any of the other changes, I'm happy to answer those questions. I know that there's probably a question about why we didn't add the Library Adams site back on to the high density sites. And what we kind of decided is that because that was a major change to the document, and the document that we wanted HCD to review was just going to be, kind of the, very, not really significant changes, that we wanted to have the opportunity to have HCD kind of approve the document as is. And then when we bring it to the City Council, we will have this discussion about what the Planning Commission's desire was to have that particular parcel moved back onto the key housing opportunity sites list. So,
Does anyone have any questions for Christine?
Yeah, I was just wondering, when is the public comment period over for the negative declaration?
It's a 30-day review.
Right.
May 15th.
Does it say in
I see it was signed on April 13th, so if it's 30 days from then,
Yeah.
it'd be May 13th or May 14th, May 15th, whatever,
13th, 30.
mid-May.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
So it's the 13th?
Oh, and one other change. Staff wanted to propose another change to the housing element, to the draft. So it's on page, it's the housing, it's the goals, policies, and 8-year action plan. And this is on page 25, and it's referring to the quantified objectives summary table. So there's some changes that HCD wanted us, because we had just zeros, and they said, well, you do have housing that you're preserving. So we agreed that we would change those numbers to reflect conservation and preservation of existing deed-restricted affordable housing, and also the units in mobile home parks. So that's what those numbers are reflecting. So I think to kind of make that more clear, I'd like to change that heading in the table there to not the heading, but the line, that line item heading, to conservation/preservation of existing housing. And then to remove the total line, because we forgot to change the totals, but the totals don't really make any sense and they're not required. So we'll just eliminate that total line. in that chart.
Thank you for taking that suggestion.
Absolutely, that's a great suggestion. So I think now I've covered it all.
All right, does anyone else have any other questions? All right, I'd like to open up the public hearing. Would anyone else like to speak at public hearing? Oh, if you could come up to speak in the microphone.
Is this current draft on the website?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Would anyone else like to speak at the public hearing? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and invite commissioner discussion. Who would like to go first? Grace?
I'm going to make the same comment I made before. I don't think this has been vetted properly. I would rather take Jennifer's new slogan is "Let's get it done," but I'd like to add correctly, and I don't think the process has been correctly. I will vote to approve it, but I just want to put in the record I don't think the process has been right. I don't think we've been transparent enough to the public.
In what way?
Can you give
Yeah.
specifics on what should be done differently moving forward?
Yeah, I would think that we would be, before we submitted it, we'd have had a big vetting with the public, and I'm disturbed because I heard the council say, and she's explained why we did it. I heard the council two weeks ago ask them to put the Adams Street property back, and it just appears that some of the requests just were. I'm also disturbed. Victor explained that we don't see the letters from HCD. I just don't think, not only we're not getting everything, but I don't think the public is. That will not keep me from voting for it tonight because I don't see there's any sense of it. I just keep battling this. I just want to go on the record with that. That's.
And can I ask why removing the Adams, or not putting the Adams Street back on would be considered a major change when wasn't it in the prior element? So in essence, the major change was pulling it off
That's correct.
for this one.
That's true, it was in the previous element, but the one that the council had approved to send to the HCD had that site removed from the, and the first draft that you saw, it wasn't in that draft. So the draft that was approved by the council to go to HCD didn't have the site on it. So to put it back on is kind of a major change, and we just didn't want to put it on and then tell HCD that it was on, and then the council review it and the council pull it off. So, and my understanding too is that site has been controversial in the past as well. So it wasn't really kind of a no-brainer site to add back onto that list.
But just to say again, it's less of a no-brainer than some of the others that are on the list. I mean, it was just hard to differentiate why some.
No, I understand. Again, it was just because we wanted the council to kind of look at it first before it went to HCD. That's all.
If I could add, if the commission really feels strongly that it should be back on the list, we can definitely bring that to council. And what I heard from council when they acted on it was I didn't hear as part of their motion or action to bring it back. So, but in any case, I think given we've been through the dialogue with HCD and with the staff, they understand the city a bit better now and the site's a bit better now. So I think if ultimately the council decided to put it back on, that wouldn't be the end of the world with HCD. So if the commission wants to make that as a recommendation, I think that's fine.
Well, and just for clarity, I thought, and I may misunderstood the last time we were meeting, but isn't anything that's more friendly towards housing not looked at as a challenge from ACD? I mean, they would be more inclined, if we're adding something on that expands the probability of housing being built, then that shouldn't derail anything, right?
That's true, and it would be. I'm sure it's something that HCD would approve and would like to see added again. If it was, the issue really was if we added it to the draft that went to HCD and then they issued the letter that said we've approved it the way we're finding that this is in compliance with state law, And then subsequently, once the council had an opportunity to review it, decided to pull it off. Well, then it becomes
A bureaucratic leapfrog. Got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's really the only reason.
My sense is that, I mean, I believe, Ms. O'Rourke, when you say that not having it there does not in any way inhibit development there, any kind of development there. So I don't see any downside to not having it there, and there might be a downside to removing it at this point. So I am fine with the way it is right now.
Commissioner Hall?
Yeah, I understand where Grace is coming from. To be completely honest, to have the housing element on an agenda and not have a packed room and riot is kind of novel.
Jinx.
And I mean, on the one hand, I suppose my more naive side would say this is good news. People don't care. They haven't shown up to raise pitchforks and raise hell yet again over this. But the other part of me says, well, when people didn't show up last time we had something that could have been controversial, then it wound up being extremely controversial later in the game. So with that said, I think, the chronology that is included in the staff report, kind of in a detailed way, lays out the process by which we went through. And I think while we stumbled out of the gate in terms of, we had that big meeting at the firehouse exactly, or just a little over a year ago, I think that an immense amount of work has been done, an immense amount of progress has been made, and there's been effort to include the community in this document every step along the way. And I think that could be a sign that, the community is okay with where it is now. We have a city council that has, seemed to have gotten through a number of meetings with positive and traction, things, people are seeing progress on the general plan and on this housing element in particular. And I think I'm ready to vote for it. I'm ready to support it. And I think that, again, this, there were a number of times to get input, and we did get a lot of input, and we did update. I mean, there's just a lot of updated information in this most recent draft that I think it's a much stronger document than it would have been, a year ago when it first saw the light of day.
Yeah, if just from a staff standpoint, I'd like to add, I think a real, and Christine mentioned it, but it's important to emphasize one of the biggest problems from a staff standpoint on the previous housing element was the commitment to do multiple families by right in the medium density zone, which occupies 300 acres in this city, and the vast majority of the housing in that zone is single family. The new housing element, we were able to negotiate with the state to essentially not have that hanging over our heads and just focus on the high density zone, and consistent with the council direction at their April 15th workshop to come up with a new land use designation that much better fits the existing single family neighborhood. So from that standpoint, and just on that one issue alone, this housing element I think is a huge improvement from a policy standpoint. One could argue that the process has had some fits and starts, but I think in terms of the end result, it's just on that issue alone, that's a huge change.
Yeah, and I think I'd just like to add one more thing. The fact that we do have a kind of a preliminary blessing, again, I agree with you, Commissioner Kistner. I'd love to see that. I mean, that's an important document, and I understand about jury duty. I mean, I think for a long, long time, our city has talked about, being afraid of getting an HCD certifiable housing element, and there was this tension between kind of some of our existing policies, which tend to be viewed as housing unfriendly or viewed from the outside as such, before you kind of get into them. We could never kind of pass muster with HCD, and it seems like we've struck the balance. We've found the right, blend, the right mix between policies that encourage the types of housing that this community needs and feels like we do need, and that the state is satisfied with it. It fits their regulations.
Can we post that letter? Can we scan it and post it to the website, and maybe we just put that
Yes.
up tomorrow? Okay, let's absolutely do that to add a little bit more of what's going
I
on.
think that's a great idea.
I just want to say thank you for all of your comments. I absolutely agree with you, Matt, and with Grace. Since we had a bumpy start, but we have had multiple opportunities for the public to speak and make their suggestions and let their thoughts be known. And I really do appreciate this timeline because I know that for me, it was very important to make sure that everyone had a voice, and I feel like we did give them ample opportunity to have a voice. And if you're listening at home, you can always call, write a letter, and your voice can still be heard. So it's not ending today. I'm okay with the document that's in front of us today. I would like to with the motion, whoever makes the motion, include that the Adams Street project be recommended to be moved back to a key site. I think that was very important to us at the past few meetings. And
Could that be a second motion? Because I really approve of the way it is, but I cannot approve of that.
we can see whoever makes the motion, see how it goes.
Well, I don't want to be on record as voting against this document, but if that's part of the...
I think that the way that motions work, if the majority of the people vote for it to be included as a recommendation.
Well, okay, I can't.
I'm not doing
Making
that.
Well, maybe we,
I'm
I mean,
not
does
doing
it
the
make, does it
motion.
make sense, as
Do
far
two
as a
motions?
recommendation? Yeah, I mean, basically, we can make the motion on the official action that is before us, and then as far as direction is concerned, we can say whether it's 3 or 2 or 4 or 5, however many of us agree with that direction of adding it back in could be a second. It's just, the sentiment of the commission.
All right, let's get a motion.
Oh, tell you, okay.
I mean, then it's two separate. I
Let's
think
have a
that's an
motion.
important distinction. And then I think with regards to the negative deck. I mean, I don't know if we need to put on the record, but I mean, I think we can make the findings to certify. To recommend certification of the negative deck.
Right, it's included in the resolution.
In the resolution,
so
right?
it's-
And
Absolutely.
people should know that they still have until May 13th to make a public comment to the city council. Is that where that would go?
It would go to staff, and we would carry the comments to council. Correct.
So I move that the Planning Commission adopt the attached that the Planning Commission recommend that council adopt. Well, are we adopting? No,
So you're adopting the resolution.
We're adopting the
that
resolution.
recommends that
Very good.
The Planning Commission recommends.
I move that we adopt the attached resolution recommending that the City Council find the attached negative declaration is adequate to address the environmental impacts of the project, the housing element update, and recommend that the City Council approve the housing element 2015 to 2023 update.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Heil,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. Do we have a motion for direction to City Council in regards to the Adams Street project?
I'll make that motion. So I so move that that staff take to and forward on to City Council our continued interest in having the Adams Street property brought back onto the key.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Yes.
Commissioner Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
No.
Commissioner Heil,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. All right. Do we have any other comments? All right, then I adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much. And the Warriors.